Welcome everybody to cubesys AI Forge in Action webinar. Before we get started, cubesys would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. So quick introduction to who's going to be doing the webinar today. So my name is Shabaz Darr. I'm a senior cloud consultant at cubesys. We've also got Paul Heaton, our CEO, and Paul's going to be very much telling us the story behind AI Forge and telling essentially how cubesys got to where we are today. And then also part of that is going to be our CTO, Silvan Maeder, and Silvan's going to go through actually a demo of AI Forge and what it is and a little bit about how it works. So some interesting demos there. So we're actually not gonna, it's not going to be death by PowerPoint, you'll be glad to hear. But what we are going to do is have a bit of a discussion with myself and Paul. So I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. So Paul, I want to speak to you first, obviously. As with every journey, there's a start to it, right? So can you actually take us back to the point where you realized as our CEO that cubesys needs to actually move beyond like beyond sort of just playing about and experimenting, but actually taking AI seriously as a business capability?
Well, maybe I'll just briefly explain what AI Forge is before I answer that question, because I think AI Forge isn't a particular piece of technology or an agent or a skill, right? It's more the approach that we've taken at cubesys and what we want to bring to our customers around how to adopt AI. And we're going to talk today about some of the challenges that we had on that journey. And so what AI Forge is, it encapsulates that motion, right? Of where do we start? There's so many opportunities inside our businesses to leverage this awesome capability that AI brings to the table. So where do we start? Well, do we start with governance and security of our data, or what agents do we build? What processes do we automate first? And it's sometimes a little bit just overwhelming of how much you can do. But if I think back to those early days, Shabaz, when we first started looking at it, I mean, look, cubesys is a technology company. It's our job to bring these type of things to our client base and do so safely and in a way that can increase productivity for our clients and help them out. And so the very first thing is we have to get stuck in and start using it ourselves. So I'm really pleased today that we're talking about our journey, right? So we live and breathe this every day, and it's impacting our business and making improvements inside our business that we're very excited about. But back in those early days, it was a little bit frantic, wasn't it, right? And some of the capability, particularly from Copilot when it first launched, there was a lot of fanfare, but then it sort of underwhelmed a little bit, right? There was maybe too much hallucination and getting people to then start habitually using AI is another challenge that's quite difficult, right? So yeah, I don't think there was a one specific point where we went, oh, we've got to do this, but you could feel that momentum building up around the capabilities of AI. And in, like I said, those early days, there's all sorts of silly examples of things. I remember one of them being that we were looking at the org structure in cubesys, and I was asking Copilot about that, and it told me there was something like a Jeremy Clark was the CFO, and I went, I'm co-founder, I've known every single person that's joined and works at cubesys, and I don't know any Jeremys, right? And what it turned out was it had picked up a piece of a sample document that was used to create Visio org charts, and lo and behold, there in that sample document, there was a Jeremy Clark as CFO, right? So there's all sorts of little nuances and things that you sort of learn along the way that sort of showed the capability, but also showed that we need structure, right? And we need control around that journey as we went forward.
So what can you actually tell? Obviously, I was obviously part of that journey, which I'll get into in a little bit. But what can you tell me about, or tell the people that are on the call with us? What did cubesys look like at the time? And what were the key pressures and challenges that you saw that made you or influence your decision to start taking AI a bit more seriously?
Do you know what? I think some of it was around surprisingly, like I said, we're a technology company, right? We should be excited about this new capability. But we're also people, right? And humans don't like change so much, or it takes time to change habits. So one of the biggest challenges I think we had early on was to help get people into the groove of using AI. So we did all sorts of things around that with, prizes for the best prompt of the week and prompt libraries and just that messaging going out all the time. And super important that comes from the top down as well. Very recently I read a case study on and some research that had been done. If team leaders and managers use AI in front of their teams, you get a 4x improvement of engagement with it, right?
Okay.
So what really surprised me, even as a technology company, was just getting people to change their habits to use AI first and where to use it in that flow of their day-to-day life. Right?
Yeah.
So that was quite interesting to see how challenging that was to change people's day-to-day lives.
What was interesting for me was obviously being part of that journey with cubesys. We did something really cool, which was you created this AI champions team within cubesys, right? And I was lucky enough to be one of those people. But rather than you telling us what to do, you put the emphasis on us, right? Look, here's AI. Go use it. Tell me what you've learned. Share with the other people within the organization. And that was very refreshing. You didn't just dictate. You told us, go use it, go influence people.
We did take a which might from the outside look like maybe aggressive or risky approach to that initial adoption of AI. But I really do think, because we're trying to change that human habit, you've got to just give people the tools and get going. Right now, we do, and we're quite lucky at cubesys. We've always been very structured around our documentation and things. But even so, we still had some cleanup and things to do around the data governance. And so, yes, you do need to do that, and you do need to be safe. You don't want to overshare the wrong type of information to the wrong roles in your business. And we've all heard the horror stories. So yes, we do need to be safe. But once you've got that confidence, or if you hive off a particular part of your data set that you're comfortable sharing, I think it's really important just get the tools out and to people's hands. The more we use it, the more that you'll become familiar with it, and the more that it'll have an impact on your business. Me and you were both being English, Shabaz, like we love our football, but like you don't get you need to practice a skill 1,000 times before it becomes a habit. And the same with AI and usage of AI. Right? We've got to get in their hands. Right?
And interesting, that's a nice little segue actually. I'll talk about next. When you're practicing these sort of skills, you make mistakes, right? Every person does, every organization does. What can you tell us about sort of those initial approaches or strategies that kind of cubesys explored when you first started with AI, and some of the, I don't want to call them mistakes, but learnings that you had as well?
Yeah, there's definitely plenty of learnings. The people part that we just talked about is key, and I think like really having that exec and leadership sponsorship, but then filtering through to your team leaders and managers, definitely very important. We also, but maybe had, especially in those early days, really too much of an expectation around AI. I think it's improved tremendously, especially in the last few months. So it's closing that gap. But when we first started to use AI, you'd expect it to write a whole document, and the analogy, and you probably hear this in the market and from lots of different people, is if you treat or think of AI or an agent or a piece of this, think of it as a person that's just started, come out of school, maybe it's just the trainee that started. There's so much that you need to learn and context that you need to give, and the guardrails that you need in place. So one of the early things I think we learned was the expectations were up here, but we can get there. You can produce tremendous output, but there's a journey to get there, right? We need to work on setting the right context for AI and the agents that you build. Make sure it's got the right guardrails. Make sure we're aligning to compliance and standards, right? So for cubesys, it's really important that we adhere to ISO 27001. If we don't tell the agent about that and set those guardrails, it ain't going to happen. And also, I think it's really important to have a tone of voice. As a company, we have a culture, right? And we have a way of doing things, and that needs to be embedded into the AI agents. We'll probably talk about that a bit later on in the webinar, but we've sort of come up with a concept in cubesys of each agent as a contract, right? And so it's a contract between us and the agent and how we want that agent to behave. Right?
And look, you've mentioned a couple of approaches that you took and a couple of learnings. Is there anything that that kind of stands out where you kind of fell short, and what were the indicators that made it quite clear that things weren't quite working, and things weren't going the way you kind of envisaged early on?
There was an inflection point for me personally, and that's, well, everybody at cubesys probably knows that now, right? That's definitely been filtered out in a large part of where we're going. There was some of that frustration, Shabaz, right? So we get pockets of really great output from AI, but it wasn't impacting the business flow and the processes within our things. It was really hard to sort of work out where to embed AI and how to drive that return on investment and value, right? And so I was actually talking with AI. I was quizzing it about how we're doing it, what we could do to improve, because it's a really good soundboard AI. You can throw questions at it and get different angles. And I specifically remember one evening doing that, and AI came back to me and said, "Well, what are you doing, Paul? You're moving from being a manager to a leader to a systems architect." And I went, "What?" I went, "What's a systems architect? How have you got to that?" And I thought, here we go again. It's it's making something up. It's one of these famous hallucinations, right? But it wasn't at all. Once I unpicked that and understood what it was doing, it framed the challenge that we had, which was, when we're doing something in our business, if we go from marketing, for example, right, where we generate a lead and that goes to sales, that turns into a piece of work that we're doing for a client, right? And then the PMR need to run that and deliver that, and the engineers, all through that, it flows throughout our business, and there's all sorts of processes and work instructions and bits of information that need to come together, and we implicitly know them as humans, right? It's what we do as our jobs and learn. But AI agents don't, and we've got to help them on that journey. So that inflection point, is what changed at cubesys, right? And it's a big part of what AI Forge is the understanding the flow through the business using systems thinking. Now, we don't have to get super academic about systems thinking. It's it's important to understand that flow. There's all sorts of things that happen there, like feedback loops and downstream impacts, and there's lots of things you can learn about a system thinking. But the main concept is that we need to understand how those processes and flows and people join together if we want to make them agentic, right? So if we want AI to take over some of those things and speed things up and lift the quality of the content, then we need to understand the flow through the business, right? And so systems thinking is a big part of what cubesys does now.
And everything you've just spoken about there, Paul, none of that is tool related. We've might have mentioned, you've not even mentioned Copilot, you've not even mentioned any tooling in what you just said there, right? It's a fundamental way of thinking, a difference there. And one thing that really stood out for me, especially at the start, was, again, I mentioned I was part of that sort of AI champions that you had, and you mentioned as well we did like prompt of the week. I feel like there was, and I could feel your frustration sometimes when we were talking. There were certain parts of so we did this AI prompt of the week. It started off really well, everyone was getting involved, but it slowly trailed off. And at that point, that was like, we knew, right, you know what, we have to evolve what we're doing now. Let's park that. We're not going to do that anymore. We're going to evolve the way we use AI now. Let's try something different. And that was really, I think that was very insightful, in my opinion, that we didn't just stick with something and bash it on the head until it was gone. We moved on. Okay, we've used that now. Let's keep on moving.
Well, that framing around systems thinking really helped us go to the next step, because when you want to lift up and become agentic and move away from those pockets of productivity that you get from AI as an individual, if you really want to help your business lift up, you don't realize how much is in people's head. Now, cubesys, I'm quite proud of how well documented we are as a business. It's one of the things. So myself, I started off on like week 1 of cubesys 14 years ago. We mapped out how we work with clients, and we built libraries around the artifacts. So I can find you a design document or a statement of work in minutes, right, from the last 14. Really strong naming standards for. But when you start to try and build agents around that, you realize how much is still in people's heads. There's all these nuances and edge cases and things. And what we realize is that's what systems thinking can capture for you. Right? So our documentation can go from step 1 to step 10, but also pick up things like known issues, the tools that you're going to need, who can help you if you need an escalation point. There's all these sort of things that you and I would know as individuals, but after working in the company, right? But how often do they get captured inside of documentation? And so we really started to realize that was a bit of a challenge for us. So where we started and where we're going to go with our demo in a few minutes is like we built an agent to help us take our documentation, which was good and solid, but really lift that up and make it more human, right? And capture those things that you would have in a conversation. If you were training somebody, like a new starter at your business, how to do things, you might go, here's the steps 1 to 10, but then you would tell them how to use that, and it'd be all that rich language that we often don't capture in our documents. So that's what we were doing with our agent, right? We're really looking to capture that rich information in knowledge base articles and work instructions and process documents. That gives you a library of system thinking.
Yeah, I do want to just you mentioned system thinking a lot, and I want to talk about your shifted thinking. Before we do that, quickly, just want to say to everyone, please do ask questions. If anything that Paul's talking about is resonating with you, please do ask questions. If we're able to answer them now, we'll answer them afterwards. So we've got a whole team ready to answer those. So yeah, Paul, that shift in thinking, right? Ultimately, this triggered at some point. Why did you actually move towards systems thinking, right? Because to me, I remember the first time we were talking about this, actually, we met for dinner and you were really excited about it. It's not the most obvious path. Many organizations would typically go down the tools. First thing you think about is tools, So why did you move down that path specifically? What triggered around systems thinking?
Systems thinking, I think when you look at that, it lifts you above departments and some of the normal structure you have, and really looks at that, as I said before, that flow through things, and it can help you identify where there's problems in that flow, right? And where there's friction points. And so by having metrics as things, so particularly as things pass from one department to another, right? So from our project delivery to finance, so we can do the invoicing, right? There's friction points, right? And there's the cost tension. System thinking to help you find those, and then you can start addressing them, right? And smooth them out. So for me, the move to system thinking, why the penny really dropped. If we're going to take on AI and make it, rather than generative and just being a productivity tool for us individually, if it's going to build inside our processes, inside our business, we need to understand that flow. And that's what system thinking does. That's why we focus on it so much.
So, Paul, I've got a really good question in the chat I do want to bring to you, because this is actually a really good question. Yeah, so Nicholas has asked, through systems thinking, how did you ensure that you're not just recreating broken processes with AI? So sometimes broken systems build broken processes, which is a really good point.
Yeah.
In your experience, did this thought process, such as changing process, was it for the better? Did it push that changing process?
Yeah, look, again, like whenever we're looking to, I think we do need to redesign our processes, right? With some of them, if we're going to put AI in there, it's going to change a little bit how we do things, because it's going to give us new capability we didn't have before, right? So, but if you're going to do that inside of every business is unique in some way and has its own characteristics, its own personality, right? And so what we're trying to do with the agent that we'll show you in a minute is get the baseline going, because if I'm going to fix something, I first of all have to understand how it works today. And we want those nuances that we get in training somebody, not just the step 1 to 10. We want those rich sort of engagement that you get from an individual training you that's been at the company for 10 years. And that's what we're doing, trying to do with our agent. And to these points, do we necessarily want to automate a process that is broken? No, that's our opportunity to fix it and make it smoother and find those friction points to do it. So again, I think taking that flow through the business approach and understanding what happens downstream and where the feedback loops are and the metrics that should that measure a good process in your business, all that rich information, metadata that we build around the instructions and things that we do, that's what makes a difference. And absolutely, you should not automate a broken process. Let's use that as the opportunity to fix it.
Great question, Nicholas. Thank you for that. Just before we get into the demo, a couple of things I wanted to bring out or discuss is, obviously I know the answer to this, but I think people will be interested to understand how you actually positioned all this systems thinking internally, right? When you start building it, when you start thinking about this process development and stuff like that, documentation. I strongly disagree with this, by the way. I get excited by documentation, but not everybody does.
Shabaz,
I'm an architect.
No engineer does. Right? No.
I'm an architect first. So what I want to understand is, how did you actually get people excited about thinking about AI?
Look, I was just saying, and to answer Nick's question, right, that if you're going to automate a process and find out what those problems are and things, you first of all, you need to write down you have a BA session, right? You work out what the process is. And we thought about that, and we thought about that at scale. How do we do that across all of our departments in all facets of cubesys? And system thinking is a part thing, but is the answer really. But to do that, I got to get people to write documentation, right? And to jot down those known issues and frequently asked questions and, tools that you're going to need to do the process, not just the process. There's lots of different metadata you'll see in some of our examples, but I'll straight away, my reaction to your point is, who the heck's going to do that? And can I afford for that to happen in my business, right? To have people spend the time doing that. And maybe that's a good segue out. Silvan's ready for his demo. We'll show you what we started to tackle that. So the very first thing that we did was build an agent, of course, right? So we used AI to solve the problem of getting that rich information to allow us to move to the next stage, which was to become agentic and automate the processes. So we started by building an agent that helps fix that documentation problem and build up a rich data and that data is what we use to then redesign and move to the next stage. But we'll talk about that after the demo. I might hand over. Oh, you're on mute, Shabaz.
Amazing. Tried not to make sure I didn't do that at least once. So thank you very much for that, Paul. We are going to bring Paul back in a little bit later, but we actually want to do a bit of a show and tell now. So this is where I'm going to hand over to our CTO, Silvan.
Yeah, thanks, and welcome to the demo section of the webinar. So I guess my job is to make that very practical, what we just looked at or heard from Paul and Shabaz. And what we're going to do is very simple and something that everybody in your company can use. In simple terms, we're turning a meeting transcript that would normally be forgotten. I'm sure you've got many of those that are recorded and forgotten into structured documentation. And to keep us in the storyline, let's all meet Mariana. She just joined our HR team, and her goal, she will sit through a meeting where she learns how to issue a new employment contract in a HR software called Worknice. So that's what we're going through. But first of all, we need a meeting transcript. Just quickly gonna get that from our call. And the purpose here is really to show you this is a meeting transcript that you would get or record on a daily basis, exact conversation that gets forgotten. So there's no cleanup, no preparation. That's what we're going to use for our next step. So the System Atlas agent. So this agent is actually a purpose-built agent that helps us to create that system thinking output. It's a tailored agent that already knows what a good work instruction looks like, and we're going to feed in that meeting transcript. For the purpose of the demo, it's easier to show you that because you could feed in another piece of information that has that rich data that we're looking for, but we just feed in that transcript and say create a work instruction. Now what the agent does, it reads and understands that transcript. And let's quickly pause on this screen. So it reads and extracts information from that transcript and actually figured out on its own. So I quickly show you that on the screen. It says issue employment contract. So that's what the conversation was about in that meeting. So it suggests that as a work instruction name. It also has a list of departments. Interestingly, it maps that to a process that we have in our business called new hire onboarding. So that work instruction is part of a bigger process, and it also picked up on a owner and maintainer and makes suggestions what to use for those properties. I'm going to chat to the agent here and confirm some of that stuff. And if your eyes are very good, you can see that the department I accidentally put in there was sales. Now again, the agent takes that information and says like, well, I think it's actually HR and skilling you're looking for as a department. So it knows and interacts with the information. I'm going to confirm because obviously the agent is right. with that pickup, and we go ahead and submit and say, yep, Heaton Skilling is the correct department. Now, what happens here is the agent has all the information it needs to produce the documentation, automatically creates that in SharePoint, and we have the finished document here. Let's quickly go to the next slide. The structured work instruction. So what I'm going to do next is we're gonna look at the structure of our SharePoint site. So the System Atlas site has a SharePoint site for each department, and in there we see those document libraries for that systems thinking output. So there's a systems library, a process library, work instruction library, and the KB library. Let's go forward. So just gonna open up HR and Skilling, click on the work instructions, and open the document. So you can see it picked up some of the SharePoint properties there. And this now isn't a meeting summary, right? You can see all the rich metadata we have in there. The department, the owner, it created, defined the purpose, it gives us a summary. We have obviously the step-by-step instructions we worked through, and it picked up the tools that are required, the assumptions. It also automatically links that information to KBs and such things if they exist. So for the purpose of the demo, I'm now happy with what I saw and read through that document and changed the status to in review. So I think it's important to understand that this documentation with that rich metadata can be obviously read by humans, but also agents. So that's what we're going to do next. We fire up our advisor agent and ask it a simple question. So the type of question that probably a new starter would ask very early on, and you guessed it. So we're just going to ask that simple question: How do I create an employment contract in WorkNice? What I get back is a very structured response based. It picks up the reference, so you could go back to the work instruction, but it also tells us the relevance and the confidence it has in this answer, and gives us what we need to basically do our job and issue that contract. I'm gonna ask another question. So here asking, do I need approval before I can send out that contract? So that's something that one of those nuances Paul talked about that's in the conversation, but then not necessarily usually captured. In here, the response I get is very detailed. It actually does point to a specific step in the work instruction that says we do need approval, and that's what we defined in a process, and in that work instruction, that's one step that we need to do. So that information got pulled out. It says yes and tells us exactly what to do. To round that out and show you a bit of contrast is, like, I'm going to ask that same question to the off-the-shelf Copilot and see what response we get. So here the same question. The first sort of response I get is good, useful, but very generic. So that's not grounded in our in how we operate in cubesys. I ask that same follow-up question, and interestingly, now when I ask it, do I need approval before I can send out the that employment contract, it actually says no. The reason it says no is it read that from the product specs in the for that specific product, and the default setting is just happens to be no. So if I ask that same question without any business context, I get a completely different answer that in the context of how we operate is wrong. So that just goes to show that if you build agents and if you have that our processes and work instructions documented, we get way better responses, and the sort of responses that that sort of documentation is important to build credible agentic AI going forward. So you could look at that documentation that we've now built and is aligned to systems thinking, and I think that is great, maybe even impressive. But this is actually just the starting point, right? To go from here, right? There's so much we can do with that information. So not only it will help you in day one with things like maybe your onboarding process or whatever else it adds. You see some of those on the slide. They add real business value today. But I think for our AI journey and what we can do, there's so much more there, right? We can maybe even to Nick's point, we can understand and see that a process is broken before we automate it. So that's the real information we got out of those conversations from the people that sit on the keyboards and do the work. So we have that documented and have a chance to understand it and modernize it.
Yeah, no, very true. Thank you very much, Silvan, for walking through that. So look, now we've actually seen System Atlas and we've seen what it can do. Paul, I want to bring you back in if you don't mind, and just ask, what sort of tangible impact did this have on cubesys, right? What did the data and the sort of outcomes actually show?
Yeah. I want to talk about a couple of concepts. I want to talk about that AI contract, right? But I'll park that for a second and come back to using this approach and what it meant. And I think when we put Systems Atlas inside our business and started this documentation process, I think there was 3 impacts. Firstly, it helped with that human engagement piece, right? Because people could see something tangible and valuable, right, straight away. Right. Secondly, it improved us as a business and our processes because we can ask questions like Silvan was showing there. We can go and find that information. Again, day one value from AI, right? And as new people join the business, being able to ask and find that rich information is super powerful. But as Silvan was saying, that's really just the starting block, because the third impact that we got there is now we have rich data about how we operate as a business, and every business has their own unique way of doing things, their own tone of voice, their own processes and knowledge inside that business. What we're doing is encapsulating that in something that we can reuse. And that gives us the foundations to go and do that across our business, across finance, across marketing, across sales, across engineering, and the PMO, everywhere in our business. We can now see how we operate. And then we can pick the ones that are going to have the most impact on us and where we find the most labor intensive bits where AI can make an impact. And now we can go agentic on that. And we've got that rich bed of information already. So engagement from people, day one value, because you're learning how your business operates truly, right? We're getting that extra nuances that we talk about, that human conversation adds in, right? And then thirdly, you've got the bedrock now and the information you need that you're going to do anyway. Anything that you want to make agentic and you want to automate with AI, first thing you're going to have to do is understand the flow and the process, right? So we get all of that from Systems Atlas as a starting point. Now, so
I think one thing I quickly want to say is what you said at the beginning, right? When you set up cubesys, we're always very structured and looked for that documentation, and that's very true. And I think we're always sort of proud of our operational documentation, but we always thought like it could be better, and it could be more detailed, and it could be more in general. So I think since we're using AI and the Systems Atlas agent to produce those kind of artifacts and documentation, that our library literally exploded, right? We have goes to show that it's
now. Yeah. It's crazy.
Easy to use and easy to create that type of documentation, right? And that's what we're striving for.
So Paul, you mentioned the AI contracts, and we heard about it a little bit. You touched on it earlier. Look, what we've essentially just seen, right, essentially represents that mapping stage, right?
Yeah.
However, mapping is only really valuable if it can be actioned safely. So as part of our leadership, obviously you are one of the heads of our leadership team with Silvan. My next question to you as a leader is, how did you trust the agent to actually operate on your behalf? Because that's a big thing, right? And how do you actually ensure it behaves within the lines of our business or your business?
So we've termed that an AI contract, and I will use the analogy again of that, like that employment contract. If you think of an AI agent doing a role inside your business, acting as one of your staff, then if you were bringing somebody on to do that, they would need internal training, right? And they would need to know what standards that you adhere to, and they need to know how you go about that. So that could be in healthcare, it could be HIPAA, and for us, that's that ISO 27001, and cybersecurity is super important. So what we realized, and we would do this, or one of the things we'll talk about is the Systems Atlas. We actually, the license for that we give away. We come and help our clients install that. There's a fee to do that piece when we activate it, but the actual agent we give away, right? We want you to use that and want you to organize your own business. But when we do that, that agent needs to know its guardrails, its human handoff points, its tone of voice, those standards that it needs to adhere to in your business, right? That's unique to you. So the very first thing we do is sit down with that contract and work out what it is in your business that the systems actual agent needs to align to, what's important for it, whether you're comfortable handing off away to a human, or where you're comfortable having that. So we have that conversation in the workshop, and we tailor the agent as we move forward beyond Systems Atlas, and we're looking to build agents within our processes. Same thing, right? We've got to build that contract. We've got to understand what the role is, or what's unique in your business, and then tailor that with the right guardrails in that agent. So that's how you get that confidence that you can trust it to do the role that you've assigned it to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that pretty much shows our whole journey and that whole customer zero story that we've kind of been talking about on social media. I think a key point to highlight for me is that this is to people who are joining us on the webinar, that you're going to experience this approach from day one with this AI Forge sort of offering that we've got. When we deploy System Atlas into your tenant, as part of sort of the activation pack, we're not just introducing a sort of an agentic or generic agent. Right, we actually tailor it and the contract that Paul just talked about to your environment. Right, that includes your regulatory requirements, your handoff preferences, and which is really important, and Paul's mentioned it a few times, that organizational tone. Right, and as a result of that, before you've even built like a single sort of use case agent, you've already gone through that sort of contract process with us. So by the time you do reach that sort of final stage, that stage 5, where the agents are operating on your behalf, that discipline's already embedded right within the organization. And that's exactly what we did. You've heard both from Silvan and Paul today. So
yeah,
that is essentially our customer zero story.
Yeah, well, we haven't talked a whole lot about the data governance and things. It's obviously that's super important, and we do that, right, and use the Microsoft tools effectively, like Purview and Agent 365 to see your landscape and make sure data. So it is super important that the ground and the foundations of your AI journey are well defined, right? And so you do need to think about that governance piece, and we can help you with that, right? But more importantly for me was that adoption needed a framework, right? So what we've developed here is something that can be used by every single department in your organization, right? It doesn't matter if they don't need to be technical. It can be anywhere there where you've got a business process, right? And you'll benefit from having that richer documentation and being able to ask questions and do that in natural language, but also give you that foundation to do that next step and really start to automate. And the stats you're seeing on the page there are just some other examples that we picked out of what's happened to cubesys since we took this journey. The amount of engagement in AI has definitely exploded. It's now part of everybody's day-to-day life at cubesys. And we made the decision early on to give everybody Copilot, every role, admin and back-end office, everybody got it, right? And I think initially there was some questions about whether that was a sensible idea or not, but ultimately I think that adoption has proved that to be a good idea. And for those of you that are worried about the cost of Copilot, if you look at Copilot now, that includes the Claude and the OpenAI large language models, and lots of ways in which we can interact with those models safely with our data inside of M365. Work IQ is a layer that Microsoft develops as a platform that interrogates Teams chats and your SharePoint libraries and lots of other things, like emails and things, to pull together answers for you and help you on your data journey. Right? There's lots and lots of capability there we can really leverage and bring to the fore for you, right? But the important thing is to have that framework to be able to drive adoption within your business, right? And one of those stats on the last page, just to finish that bit off, that health check there, we would do a health check for our MSP clients every month. And that was like a man day, an engineer spending a day looking at the environment, making sure we hadn't, got configuration drift and things haven't changed, and make sure we're meeting our commitments to our clients. Using AI now, we pull that data out and we've got a report inside of 10 minutes. That's a huge impact on us now, freeing up that engineer to do valuable work inside our clients' organizations rather than building a report, right? And it also means that if there is a problem in there, it picks up a problem, we've got the manpower to go and action it quicker, right? So things like that are what you're looking for inside your own businesses and organizations. Where can we cherry pick those improvements to free up us to go and do more? And I think that's what's really exciting about the AI journey.
Look, I put my hand up. Being one of the consultants that did those health checks, that has revolutionized the amount of time we spend. So yeah. I can vouch for that. And honestly, I want to admit one other thing as well. I was very much a tinfoil hat person when it came to AI very early on, but the way we at cubesys have approached it totally changed my thinking. And I honestly use it day in, day out now as part of my role, which I suppose brings me on to how we obviously want to help other people with it, with our AI Forge activation pack. So you can scan that to book in now and get a readiness report.
So that's for us two things inside the activation pack.
Yep.
One is we'll do an assessment of where you are governance-wise. Are you ready for AI? Is it safe to deploy? So there's some questions and some we look at your environment and give you a scorecard on that. That might well mean that you need to pause for a second and tidy up the backyard and do some of that cleanup and governance piece. We're there to help you with that, right? But first of all, let's find out where you are on the journey, because if you're good, let's move on. Let's get on to the exciting stuff. And the second part of that activation pack is that we give you the Systems Atlas agent, right? So there is some setup costs and things like that, but the agent itself is yours for free and licensed, and we'll tailor it to your organization, and then we can get going and start doing that BA work to find out where AI will have the most impact in your business, be able to see those processes and have them all documented, ready for us to come in there and do those workshops to build agentic processes, and that's exciting.
So another quick announcement as well. We are going to send everyone who's joined us today information about this, but we do have a AI immersion briefing coming up. It's on Thursday, the 18th of June, 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. So you can join in person or online. I think it's going to be held in Melbourne. Is that right? Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it's in Melbourne.
Yeah. I think there's a bunch of information in the chat there, right? So people will, of course, follow. Just well, we got the mic. There's still quite a few people. Any more questions?
There is one. There was one, yeah. So Nishant has asked. I think this was for the demo specifically. He just wanted to check: was this agent created through Copilot Studio?
So there is we've done a lot of. I saw. See Paul smirking that as a lot of iterations and we went through to building that. Look, the creator agent is a bit more complex, because when we create process documentation, for example, it can create your whole process map as a picture, and the well formatted structured Word document actually not that easy to create with just Copilot at the moment. So there's a custom agent that's built for the creation part, but the actually advisor where we can ask questions, that is a Copilot agent. Copilot Studio agent. So.
We did try with low code to start with, but yeah, we found there's some limitations that we needed
some
to
limitations
address.
very quickly. That
maybe that'll be our next part of our journey. Maybe that'll be the next part of our journey on this using AI.
Yeah, I think some of the citizen coding in that Copilot Studio is great, but you will hit limits, right? And we found that we did, so we needed to go pro code with that. Yeah.
But there's a lot more we can do with that agent now as well. So looking forward to the next iterations of that. And there's lots of features and ideas in terms of checking documentation, etc., that can go into that. So stay tuned for that as well.
So just a quick correction as well. The immersion session that's going to be happening is going to be held in the Sydney Microsoft office. That's June the 18th. And as there's a link in the chat as well to be able to register to that if you're going to be around.
Awesome. So
thanks, Shabaz. If there's thank you both. Massive thank you to Paul and Silvan for joining us. Great demo. Thank you to everybody else who's joined us as well. Obviously, if you have any more questions, I believe this is our LinkedIn profile chat as well. Please do reach out to us. Obviously, the activation pack as well. To onboard yourselves with that. So
I should probably, as you finalize, you should mention that obviously this is the start of the journey. We'll have more webinars coming up about getting into building those agentic agents for you, what that looks like, and then ultimately how we manage them. So we have a full end-to-end service that can help from this activation piece where we start the journey and start thinking about at scale how we can bring AI into your business from business workflows, but we obviously have the build and then the run part as well, so we can help maintain that. Of course, and anybody that's been watching the AI space over the last couple of years, I mean, how fast has that moved? It's been ridiculous, the improvements and changes. So we fully expect that we'll be able to add more to these agents as we go on. You're going to have business requirements where you want to tweak them, so we'll have a service there to help you make sure that that whole piece is in and life cycles done.
We're getting some great engagement. Paul in the chat. Nicholas is back saying amazing demo. Can see the benefit in future for businesses moving ERP, CRMs, etc. Maybe he missed it. Is there a roadmap to build agentic models to action activities?
Yes, and maybe that's another webinar will come coming up. But please reach out, talk to us. We're more than happy to talk to you about that whole journey. Yeah.
Thanks, Nicholas, and thanks, Nishan, for your questions. I think we are unfortunately out of time. Some great engagement in the chat. Thank you, everybody who joined in. Thank you for all those who have joined us. Reach out to us directly. Obviously, we'll leave the scan barcode as well on the page until we leave the call. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Paul and Silvan.
Thanks for your time, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.